Hey friends, it's Robin. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing my most surprising books of 2023. If you watched yesterday's video, I already mentioned this, but I do want to mention it again. I am getting over strep throat, so my voice might cut in and out a little bit, but I need to get these videos filmed because we are a week behind on videos now. On top of that, I am filming this video at night. It is completely dark outside. So I have all of my lights on, so hopefully the lighting isn't too terrible in these few videos that I'm filming today, but we're making do with what we can. So today's video, just like yesterday's, is going to be ranked from my least most surprising to my most surprising book of the year. I do have 10 books again on this list. Some of these are all-time favorites. They just weren't books that I was anticipating falling in love with the way that I did for whatever reason. So let's get started with number 10, which was Sweet Vengeance by Viana Oniomo. This one ended up making the list because this was a new to me author. I knew nothing about this book. I had never heard of this author before, and I ended up going into this one, I think, because of Mina from Mina Reads. If I'm remembering correctly, I think she shared this over on Instagram, and the cover completely intrigued me because this cover is beautiful, and I completely fell in love with this book. I ended up giving it 5 stars. This is a good for her revenge story following a heroine who wants to get revenge against her sexual assaulter, and she ends up summoning this demon to help her get away with the revenge plot, and the two of them end up having this romance. I think what I loved most about this was, one, it was super vengeful, and I loved watching the heroine get her revenge against her attacker, but two, the romance between them was handled so well in light of what she went through. Their first sexual scene together, I just think was done so fantastically because the heroine is still working through some trauma after the assault, and the way that the hero just let her take the lead, never touched her once, I thought was absolutely amazing. And now I have downloaded or saved everything this author has ever written and plan to binge her backlist in 2024. Number 9 is Last Light by Claire Kent. I gave this book 5 stars. Had no idea what to expect going into this one. If I have videos for any of these books, I will link them up in the cards and down in the description box. But this was a post-apocalyptic romance that I read for a vlog where I read some of my friends' recommendations from an A to Z live show that is hosted by Stef from Novelty Corner. This book blew me away. I have not had good luck with post-apocalyptic romances, but the way that Claire Kent wrote this world and wrote this romance was fantastic. This is an age gap romance, and it is discussed throughout the book that in any other world, in any other situation, these two would never have been together. They would have never even looked at each other in that way, but because of what they have gone through and what they have survived and what they are currently doing, they are the perfect person for each other, and it was just fantastic. I thought this did such a good job of utilizing the post-apocalyptic world. There is a scene in this book that made me cry where they are witnessing nature for the first time after years of death and decay, and I was so emotional over it, and I was not expecting a book like this to hit me emotionally the way that this one did. So definitely surprising, definitely an all-time favorite. Number 8 was Love and Other Risky Business by Sarah Brenton. This one ended up being surprising because this was an arc that I was reading in October. I had downloaded this one because the hero was bi and the heroine was ace, and I am always on the lookout for ace rep in my romances, and I also love friends to lovers, and so I was really excited for this book. And then I started seeing some not so great reviews, and the Goodreads rating was getting lower and lower, and so my expectations of this were very low by the time that I picked this book up. And if you watch that vlog, when I go to pick up this book, I even say how I'm anticipating DNFing it, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I really ended up enjoying this book, and in fact, I'm reading the second book in the series right now. I just thought this was a really great friends to lovers romance. I thought that this did a great job where you understood why these two were friends and never took that additional step, which I think can be a little tricky in a friends to lovers romance. I really liked the forced proximity caretaking aspect. I thought that this book was hilarious and super steamy and sex positive, and I just I think this book was really freaking endearing and adorable. Number 7 was Bewitched by Laura Thalassa. I, at this point, can't remember if I read this before or after Pestilence, but in hindsight, loving this book is a shock. I really did not like Pestilence. I unhauled all of my copies of that book and series, but I gave this book 4 stars. I thought this was a fun, classic fantasy romance. If you are into the fantasy romance buzz that is currently happening, I think that this is a great one to pick up. It hits a lot of those classic fantasy romance beats. Fated mate, alpha hero, you know, the heroine who doesn't quite understand her powers or who she is. But at the same time, it had like some really unique little twists in it that made it feel more modern and up to date and set it apart. And I had a really good time with it. This is following a heroine who is a witch, but whenever she uses her power, she loses memories, which I thought was a really fun setup for this story. She goes on this trip to hopefully get an acceptance to this coven and ends up waking a sleeping god who thinks that she is his long-lost love and wife, who is the one that locked him up in the first place. He ends up following her back home. She's at this like coven school. It feels very much like a university college sort of setting, and suddenly people are being murdered on campus, and the heroine is trying to figure out if she or this god are somehow involved because she is losing memories. It went a lot of directions that I anticipated. It's a little over the top and cheesy and corny, but it is also just a really fun story. Next was A One Night, One Bite by Drea Anderson. This made my most surprising list because I find it so insanely impressive that I gave a new to me author novella, like prequel novella, 5 stars. Every time I pick up a prequel novella, I am left feeling like, why did I need to read that prequel novella? Like, it didn't add anything to the story, it didn't do anything, but the way that Drea Anderson has me on a leash rabid for this next book and series is unbelievable. This can totally stand on its own as a story, but I need her to expand on this world because this is a fun twist on vampires. Characters were great. I thought the world as a whole was really fun and unique. I not only want more in this, but I want to read more of her books as well because of this novella. And I think that being able to achieve that in such few pages is highly impressive. Number 5 was Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher. This was like the second book that I read in 2023, and this book still blows my mind that it ended up being a 5-star read because this is so far outside of my comfort zone. As far as I knew going into this book, this did end up being fantasy romance, but going into this book, I thought this was like strict fantasy, and I was not about reading this book. I was originally filming this for a like reading booktubers favorite books of the year video that didn't end up getting posted for a couple of different reasons, but I was going into this book like, I'm gonna give it a chapter or two, and if I don't like it, like I won't read it. And I ended up reading this in like a single sitting. I was completely hooked from the get-go on this book. This book is frickin' hilarious. Like, the amount that I laughed in this book took me by surprise. We have like this sentient sword having to help the heroine who accidentally summons him, and he is trying to get her out of this situation with her late husband's family. They end up traveling the land and run into all these other kooky characters who kind of get in their way or throw a wrench in their plans, all so that they can hopefully get her inheritance and house back. And it is a really funny travel fantasy, which is so not what I normally like. I normally hate travel stories. I normally am not a big fantasy reader, especially like classic fantasy. And I had such a good time with this one. I thought that the romance was great. I thought that the humor was like absolutely hilarious. It was definitely my type of humor, and the traveling aspect brought a lot to the story, and it wasn't just like downtime of them traveling. This was another one that I was ready to just like be done with, and now I want to read more of T. Kingfisher's fantasy romances. And number 4 was With Love from Cold World by Alicia Thompson. The reason that this one got so high on the list is because I ended up DNFing Alicia Thompson's debut novel. The only reason I ended up picking picking this one up is because of the synopsis and the characters, and I'm so glad I did, because this ended up being like a 4.5-star book. Like, this was such a fun, cute romance. We have an openly bi, sunshiny hero and a heroine who is far more reserved and quiet, and they are total opposites, and they end up having to work together to try and save this kitschy Christmas store that is located in the middle of Florida. They learn a lot about each other along the way. There's a really fun, like, locked in, only one bed sort of trope where they're stuck in an office together. There's a life-sized snow globe scene as well. I had such a good time with this. Number 3 is the Charming series by Sarah Blue. I went down a whole journey with this series, and all of it stemmed from this random video idea that I had where I would read single dad romances, which ended up turning into a 2-part single mom versus single dad romance vlog. I picked this up simply for the fact that it had the ex's dad trope in it, and it was the book that kind of was the catalyst for that vlog series idea. And I was expecting nothing out of it. I went in expecting this to just be like purely for this video, and I ended up having such a frickin' good time with that book that I have also read the subsequent 2 books that follow that. I think I've given all of the books in this series 4 stars. Are they exceptionally well written or well crafted or developed? No. Are they highly frickin' entertaining and readable and bingeable? Yes, this is a pure enjoyment story. Do not go into this expecting some sort of highbrow plot or well-developed themes. It is enjoyment only, but they are steamy and they are sex positive and they are funny and they are just really fun reads. Number 2 is probably a book that nobody wants to hear me talk about anymore, but I'm going to do it anyways, and that is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez. I loved this book. This was one of my favorite books of the entire year. I gave it 5 stars. It's a book that I've talked about endlessly over the last 2 months because it's one of the few books that I absolutely adored in the final 2 months of the year. This is a YA fantasy that I would say leans on the older end of YA. The heroine's family is from Argentina, but they spend half of the time in Egypt. When she learns that her parents disappeared into the desert and are presumed dead, she ends up leaving Buenos Aires and sailing to Egypt to try and figure out what happened to her parents. And along the way, she learns a lot of secrets and has a really cute romance with one of the guys on her uncle's team. The epilogue of this book had no right to do that to me, and I am fair roll for the next book in this series. And then the number 1 most surprising book of the year is another favorite of mine, and that is Their Vicious Games by Joelle Wellington. This was another 5-star read, another YA story, which is wild, but this was a recommendation, I believe, from Jessie on YouTube. They were raving about this book, and I kept seeing it in reels of theirs, so I ended up picking it up during, I want to say, Black Aweenathon. I listened to this entire book in a single sitting. I was hooked on this book. This opens up with this heroine who is graduating high school, and after a event happens, she loses all of her scholarships when her white counterpart didn't, obviously, and she is desperately trying to find a way to get her acceptance back. Every single year after graduation, this like insanely wealthy and powerful family does this game, and the woman who wins the game can essentially have anything. And she enters this game, and the game is vicious as hell. She learns what the game actually is and what it's intended for, and it goes bananas. I was not expecting this book to go where it did, but Joelle Wellington did not pull a single punch in this book, and I was blown away. The amount of times that I audibly gasped while reading this book, I didn't see it coming. I thought I knew exactly where this book was going, and then something hits at like the 50% mark and just took off. I was blown away by this. I loved all of the themes and discussions around the power dynamic and like the discrepancy between what is expected of Black women versus white women and the different standards that they are held to, along with the power and seemingly untouchability of privileged, wealthy white families. It was so well done. I loved the side characters. I thought every single character in here was so well developed, and even the like truly evil characters, had like such good character development that you enjoyed hating them. I absolutely love this book. I cannot wait to read her next YA horror. It's coming out, I want to say next fall, and I'm already ridiculously excited for it. So that is it for my most surprising reads of 2023. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if they were some of your favorites as well. Let me know what your most surprising book of last year was, and thank you all so much for watching. If you made it to the end of this video, I will see you in my next one. Bye!